Hi guys, I'm TheDefiniteArticle for Grinder School, and I am back with the second part of my hand review series. This will be the final part. I don't think I have enough hands to do 3 parts here. In case you didn't see the last video, I'll quickly mention that there won't be a HUD in this video because for some reason in Poker Tracker 4, whenever I use the hand replayer, it takes 5 or 6 minutes for every hand for my HUD to load. So I do have some notes on the side of this video, and I will be relaying all the relevant stats to you. So you needn't worry about that. There isn't particularly a theme to this video. I just think it's a lot of interesting hands and interesting spots that we can consider in a variety of ways. So without further ado, we will again continue, and I think I've introduced about 4 of my last 5 videos by saying without further ado. Quick deviation, I know this is right at the start, so this might not be particularly what you want to see, but the source of that, the reason why I say that so much is that when I was young I had a soccer video game wherein the commentator would always say, and without further ado, let's get on with the action. Okay, boring, very boring story aside, in this hand the cutoff, who is, I think he's a slightly weaker reg, for reasons which aren't relevant to this hand, I'm not going to state because I'm still slightly paranoid that other regulars, other 100 NLZ regulars, although I doubt they subscribe to Grinder School, they could do, and I don't want them to hear me say what I think is bad about their games, because they will improve. Though of course I do hope that everyone who subscribes to Grinder School improves from these videos. I just don't necessarily want other regulars in my games improving where they don't have to, with targeted advice. Anyway, yeah, he's 22-17, raising the first in from the cutoff 25%. Both the blinds and regs, I think calling is pretty standard here, especially against a min raise. I think 3 betting is also an option. It's arguably an okay strategy against min raises just to never call outside of the blinds, just because I think that a lot of the people using them don't really understand how to play the range properly, and so they're either going to overfold or underfold. And also you're going to see a 3-bet pot wherein you have a polarized range as a 3-better. And they have a condensed range as a pre-flop caller, with a deeper SPR, which is very favourable to you, especially in position. Furthermore, if they 4-bet, you can peel pretty wide because it's not going to be a very big 4-bet and there's going to be a decent amount of money left behind. But I think calling is a fine option, and that's what we do here. We flop a huge draw, and our opponent c-bets. So I think the point here is that is about, clearly this is a board on which we want to raise in range, and I think the point is that I want to make here is that when deciding which draws to raise with, we want to raise with draws which are so strong that they're pretty much value raises, like this hand. So this is a favourite against nearly all of his range. All we want to raise with draws that's so weak that calling with them is going to be very close to 0 EV. So we might consider King Jack of Hearts, a hand like that here. Possibly King Queen of Hearts, because King Jack of Hearts has a double gutter. Or maybe if this were 10-9-2, then we might consider 8-7, a particular hand like that, or hands along those lines. But this clearly falls into the former category. There is nothing particularly that's wants to alter that play exploitatively. He is folding to 55% of flop raises after c-betting 54%. Those are pretty standard numbers. Maybe he's folding to a few more flop raises than he should, but either way, we're going to choose to raise here, and he calls. We turn a flush, but this is quite an interesting turn card because it pairs the board as well. Now the pairing of the board is quite interesting for two reasons. First, it makes our flop sets practically invulnerable because, well, there are just very few ways for hands which weren't sets already on the flop to be ahead or ever outdraw sets on this board. So clearly this is slightly different with the board in that there are a few more straight flush possibilities available for our opponents when we have a set. But normally a set is just going to have overpairs to worry about and two outs from overpairs on a turn card which pairs the board. The other thing is that our sets, and remember sets are going to make a pretty big part of our flop value raising range. We all of a sudden lose two combos of sets from our range, which is actually quite substantial, because we're not necessarily going to raise pocket tens on this flop. We'd quite like to protect our calling range to some extent, so he can't just go batshit over betting turns in rivers when we do flat call on blanks to prevent our range from being too capped. So if we assume that we only raise 1 out of the 3 combos of pocket tens here, on the flop we have 3 combos of pocket sevens, 3 of pocket nines, and 1 of pocket tens. That's 7. So when the turn card takes away 2 of those combos of pocket sevens, it's taking away 2 over 7, about 29% of our set combos, which somewhat decreases the strength of our range. And because of what we said earlier about how we ought to be deciding which draws we put in our flop raising range by adding the strongest and the weakest, we don't actually have many flushes here, because flush draws tend to be in the middling section, which hands which aren't strong enough to raise as a sort of value draw, but equally they aren't weak enough that we can raise fold them, and we're pretty happy or they're close to 0 EV, so to call with. Especially on this particular board, we don't really have, none of the draws we have on here, none of the flush draws we have here are nut flushes, because firstly we 3-bet ace king and ace queen of spades pre. We possibly have ace jack of spades because that has a gut shot, it's a nut flush draw, and possibly an over, possibly 1 or 2 overs against our opponent's range. But apart from that, nut flush draws, they're just one overcard apart from the flush draw in terms of outs, and that overcard isn't necessarily going to be live, especially considering we expect our opponents betting range, bet calling range to be like ace 10 or aces type hands. So we're probably not going to raise those on the flop. So we don't have many super strong flushes whereas we expect our opponent to bet call nut flush draws on his flop very often. So in terms of flushes, he is doing better than us. 10-9 we're not particularly fond of anymore because obviously it loses to jacks plus. 9-7 we probably don't call pre, and apart from that we don't really have any value hands. So altogether, although we've binked the turn, so to speak, our range isn't looking particularly fantastic on this turn card. So I think the way to play this is actually to check back pretty often when we're checked to, even with strong hands like this one. So when he does check, that's what I elect to do. River is sort of inconsequential. Arguably, if he has any 8x, he can start value betting that now, which is good for us. If he has king queen at all, he can start value betting that now. I guess he might bet call king queen of hearts on this flop, or maybe king of spades queen. And we now lose to the one remaining combo of pocket jacks, but apart from that, the river doesn't change that much, and that's especially considering we don't expect him to have that many 8x combos. Because hands like 10, 8, 9, 8, 7, 8, we don't expect to see bets. Ace 8 can go either way. It might bet call. King 8 probably bet folds most of the time on a board in which ranges are so strong. Same with queen 8. Well, queen 8 hits nuts on a jack. Sorry, second. It hits a strong. It beats an 8 on a jack, so it's more similar. And jack 8. Well, obviously it was already a straight, so it might 3-bet the flop some percentage. 8-6 suited the same. Where was I? Yeah, so we're talking about the fact that it doesn't have that many 8s. I think we might expect to see him start actually turning hands like ace 9 if he has it into a bluff. That would make sense. Ace 9, king 9, I think a good hand to turn into bluffs. Ace 9, king 9, queen 9. Though I don't think they should see bet often. Arguably, he should look into turning ace 10 and king 10 into a bluff. Because our range on this river is certainly very strong. We have very little, which is a draw on the flop for whatever reason, which we raise, which is now less than at least a straight. Or at the very least a pair which beats a 10. So if we choose to raise king jack on the flop, then that will obviously be a 10. So I think that makes sense for him to turn it into a bluff. His 1-1 soul flop is 48, so I guess he might be capable of turning those into bluffs, but I don't think our population assumptions are necessarily such that we expect people to be capable of turning a 10 into a bluff here. So basically, we can't. If he bets, we can't fold because he might have some worse value hands, so king queen or an 8, and also he can possibly have some bluffs. Plus, this is pretty high in our range, but we don't really want to raise either because firstly he has 10-7 suited, 9-7 suited. And he has pretty much all the nut flushes. He just has a ton of stronger hands in our hand in his range, so we can't really raise. So if he bets, it's a pretty clear call, and if he checks, it's obviously a pretty clear value bet. He does bet. Against this particular sizing, it seems like a bit of a shame to just call because I do feel that most players would use a bigger sizing with our stronger hands here, but he's not, because we don't read that he's necessarily capped when he uses this sizing. I don't think we can raise just because it really sucks when we get 3-bet with this hand, and it would be a really, really super fun line for him with ace of spades, 10 to bet 3-bet this river. Although personally, I doubt this guy is capable of it. So we do just call and we win against 8-9, and I think his decision to c-bet here is pretty awful. It's one of the situations on which it's one of the hands on this board with which you can check call the flop and then nearly any turn, because it's relatively invulnerable. It's not particularly happy to see a king, queen or ace, but it can still check call another bet because it has the open-ended to go with it. And on hands which, on certain cards which are going to make a lot of other pair hands vulnerable, this often turns a straight on those cards, so a jack or a 6. So I don't like c-betting this hand, but I think clearly regs at 100 are still going to make a ton of mistakes. They're not very good for the most part, so it's nice to see how this hand played out. I think his river value bet is also pretty thin, because while we can just about call with a jack, it's pretty tough to see what's out here raising the flop with and then calling down. Possibly 10-9, we might decide to call down here, because, well, clearly I don't expect him to bet aces through queens, and with 10-9 we block a lot of his value hand, but that's only going to be, well, we don't have 10-9 offsuit pre, so that's going to be 2 combos, given he blocks the 9 of diamonds. So that's a very narrow calling range, and we also, perhaps he doesn't realise that we play the turns away, but especially after seeing this, he should realise that this bet on the river is very bad. Because while we might have something of a betting range on the turn, we're not going to have a wide one, and we're going to have many hands stronger than his hand for checking back the turn with. Okay, that was actually quite a long first hand, but I think it was a super interesting hand. So I hope you enjoyed that. We're going to continue with queens. We're in a small blind. We're a little bit deep, so this guy's a reg. He's raising first in from the cutoff with 23% of hands, which is a little bit tight. But that's sort of reflected in the fact that he's only folding 43% of 3-bets on the cutoff. So we're going to 3-bet. Again, because we're a little deep, we're going to make it a little bigger. And he calls. We flop an overpair. I think we're probably going to want to check call some overpairs here, because otherwise when we check, we very rarely have a strong hand. I think we probably almost always want to check call any 10x we have. So it's going to be jack 10 suited, jack through 8, ace 10 suited, and possibly ace 10 offsuit, and 10-9 suited. But we're also going to want to check a lot of trashy hands here, like king queen offsuit. We're just going to want to check fold on this board most of the time, and that's 12 combos, so it's going to be quite tough to protect our checking range. With that said, I think both pocket aces and pocket jacks are better checks than pocket queens here. Aces because it's not vulnerable at all, and pocket jacks because it blocks some of our opponent's continuous range in jack 9 suited and jack 10 suited, whereas queen 10 suited is more likely to raise fold pre. So I think pocket queens is just going to be a very clear bet here. He calls. We could possibly make the flop bet a little bit bigger, because his range pre-flop is constructed in such a way that I don't think he's going to have many hands he wants to fold on this board. So given stack sizes, we could make it up to about $13, but I don't think it's a huge problem with the way the hand is played. In terms of the 4 of clubs, again, I think checking is an option with the queen of clubs, but we don't always check aces with the ace of clubs on the flop, and I think that that's definitely going to be a better check here. And also we're going to want to continue barreling most far bluffs on this turn card, so I think that we want to use a very high turn barrel frequency and thus bet this particular hand pretty much always here. Given our small flop bet, we still probably want to bet a better size, which allows us to threaten most of the stacks on the river, so I think about $28 to $30 is going to be best here. So I think that's a little bit small, but not particularly small. We get a call, the river's a king. So at this stack depth, I think most regs would be inclined to raise a lot of stronger hands before here, particularly on the turn. So I don't think we're behind too often, but I'm not certain how often even a 10 decides to call here. And also, I think we are going to have some hands that we want to check fold on this river, so if we've decided to double barrel a ace jack, for instance, we're going to want to check fold that now. Though I don't think betting is bad by any means. I think check calling is probably going to be a better play, because I think check calling is going to be better than check folding, because he has a lot of missed draws. So he has 9-8 pretty much always. He might have 8-6 suited probably not, given his tight cut-off opening range. He probably has a lot of ace-x of clubs. We block king queen of clubs, which is good for us. If he decides to double float king queen of diamonds for whatever, which I think is pretty shocking, so I don't think it matters that much. Well, obviously it's blocked both by the board and our hand, but if he double floats king queen of diamonds, he's probably going to consider double floating all sorts of king queen combos anyway, and but also all sorts of other random combos, which means his ranges are so wide for reaching this river. So I think we can see that it doesn't have a particularly wide value range. He has a fair few bluffs, so I think check calling is going to be the best play here. So we do check call. It's a pretty big bet. I think the thing is, I'm a bit nervous about calling these size bets in general because people tend not to bet 62.5 big blinds as a bluff. Just because they're nits and they don't like the natural variance it brings, but I think by the time you get to 100 ml, people often realise that when they reach a river with 9 high here, so when they reach a river with 9-8 or jack 9 of clubs or whatever, they simply have to bluff because the EV of checking is 0 and they're going to have something of a value betting range there. So I think guessing, what odds were we guessing? 2.5 to 1. I think queens is a very clear call. If he jams, it's actually a pretty close decision because, and I expect calling to be very close to 0 EV if he jams, but fortunately he didn't. Unfortunately, he showed up with ace king of clubs, which I think is slightly misplayed. I think he played it fine post flop, but even at this stack depth, even slightly deeper than 100 big blinds, I'd like to see a four bets call pre whether he's calling an all-in or an all-in 5 bets. And particularly at this stack depth, I think it's important to 4-bet because ace king suited is going to play very well in the 4-bet pot. Yeah, so that's unfortunate, but nice hand, I guess. Next hand, so the pre-flop opener is a fish who isn't raising that often, so we don't really want 3-bet 9s. We could to isolate, but I don't expect to be doing too well against this particular fish's raise calling range. They were 22-9 or something. The small blind squeezes. I'm not sure how much they know about the fish, but the fish is one tabling, which is important because it means that they could be assuming that the fish is raising something like 40% in the spot and thus be squeezing very wide. Because a big blind is also a fish, I expect the reg squeezing range. He is a solid aggressive regular. 3-betting 9% overall and squeezing 6%, but I expect both those numbers to be bigger in this situation. But yeah, the regular, because the big blind is a fish, I expect his squeezing range, if it was particularly weighted towards suited cards as bluffs in the first place, which I don't think squeezing ranges tend to be, because by the time you've got a raise and a call, suited cards often look very attractive to just call with. Because you're getting decent odds and they play well post flop. So you're going to see a lot when you see a squeeze. You're often going to see hands like King Jack offsuit post flop, which don't play particularly well in high SPR spots. But when you reduce the SPR, they're going to play well because when they flop top pair and also they have decent blockers. But in particular, this is exacerbated because King Jack off is just going to play terribly 4-way out position, and because there's a fish in a big blind, it's going to fold relatively rarely. But also suited cards going to play particularly well. So the big blind folds, the pre-flop raiser folds. Because we think his squeezing range is going to be pretty wide, and this is pretty high in our range, we're not going to be calling too wide here, so we're probably just calling jacks through 9s, ace queen suited, ace jack suited. Possibly a few king queen suited type hands, but we do call here. We flop a set, and we face a c-bet. I think raising is pretty bad here. The problem is, if we consider our range, and particularly the range I just talked about, we have pocket nines, we don't have pocket sevens or pocket aces, we don't have any two pair combos, and then the next strongest hand is ace queen suited, which you might 3-bet pre-flop some percentage of the time in the first place. So we don't have many. We pretty much only have this hand to value raise with, and having such a well-defined value raising range is never good. Both in terms of controlling one's bluffing frequency and also in terms of giving particular portions of his range particular blocker power. So I think it's pretty clear this is just a call. It's not a particularly great turn card, though it's worth remembering what we said pre-flop about his squeezing range, his bluffs being weighted against suited cards. And it's also notable that the ace of spades is on the board, so he can't have ace king of spades, ace queen of spades, which would be a loss of his value betting range on this turn. So, but we do expect him to continue bluffing with hands like king queen and king jack with a spade. But with that said, if he does bet, because we don't have a particularly strong read that he's certain to have played these, to have not squeezed these suited combos pre-flop, I don't think that raising, well, it would be a jam at the stack depth, but I don't think raising is a particularly attractive option, though it could be okay with a stronger read. But the thing is, we should be perceived to have a lot of flushes in our range ourselves, because if you remember what we said our pre-flop calling range was, it had a lot of king queen suited, king jack suited type hands, and naturally a lot of those are made flushes. So with that said, the strength of our range should imply that he shouldn't be betting very often here. With that, and I think a lot of people will realise that when they have ace king or ace queen and won't bet his turn. But conversely, I think they will bet his turn with king queen and king jack with a spade, without really considering how much, to what extent they have a value range here. So we face a bet again. Just to quickly talk about his post-flop stats, in 3-bet pots, you see betting the 3 streets 65%, 54% and 59% respectively. So he's betting a pretty wide range on every street in general. So I would expect him to A, be betting pretty wide to bluff here, but B, I'd expect him to be capable of possibly turning made hands into a bluff, which will be important when we see the river, because I do call the turn. Now on this river, something quite surprising happens. Our opponent jams. Now that is weird, and I'll tell you why it's weird. Ace king and ace queen obviously can't jam. We don't think he has many. We think he has few to no flushes in his range given pre-flop, and the fact that the ace of spades is on the board. So what the bloody hell is he jamming with for value? We think the only realistic value hand that he can show up with here is king queen, and king queen is a thin enough value jam here, considering we definitely have a few flushes in our range, that not all regulars at 100 NL are going to be capable of making it. With that said, given we expect most of his turn barrels when he does have king queen to have a spade in them, king queen with a spade is going to be a significantly better value jam for him because he blocks our flushes. Because when he has a king of spades, for instance, we obviously can't have king queen of spades or king jack of spades, which, given our pre-flop range is quite tight and well defined, is a significant portion of them. That's going to be 2/3 of all ones that we could possibly have. So I think jamming king queen with a spade is probably quite good. Similarly, the queen of spades blocks queen jack of spades and king queen of spades, so again blocks 2/3. But on another level, I also think that he should be jamming all King Jack combos here. His 1-1 soft flop is high, his 1-1 soft flop is 49 over a good sample. And normally I'd expect something between 45 and 48, so that would suggest that he is going to be capable of turning a jack into a bluff here. And if you've seen my videos, if you've watched my videos before, and indeed to any 100 NL reg, I would really, I kind of hope that it's bleeding obvious that you can't check a jack and win on this river. Simply because our range for calling pre is strong, our range for calling flop is stronger, our range for calling turn is really strong. And if we have any weak hands left, if we have any hands weaker than the jack in our range left on the river, then we're going to be shoving them ourselves. And you definitely can't check call with the jack there. So he can have King Jack, which is a bunch of combos. He can possibly have Queen Jack offsuits, which is another few combos. This is a spade, but if we remember that we're getting 2.4 to 1, we only need to be good. Well, the program tells us 29% of the time, and we only think he's jamming King Queen when he has a spade. Although I think that's all the combos of King Queen that he gets to the river with. I think he's probably over bluffing. So if we work this out specifically, if we assume he squeezes pre with all combos of King Queen, King Jack, and Queen Jack offsuits, so that's 12 combos of each. There are six, I think. Hold on. There are 6 combos of King Queen with a spade. 6 combos of King Jack with a spade, 6 combos of Queen Jack with a single spade. Now some of those King Jack and Queen Jack combos are blocked, so there are going to be 5 combos of each with a spade, because obviously the Jack of Spades isn't blocked. So considering we need to be good 29% of the time, and there are 6 value combos and 10 bluff combos in this range. If those 6 value combos represents the 70, the 29% of the time that we need to be good, that we can not be good rather. Well, where am I going with this? We can be wrong 71% of the time, which is 5/7 of the time. So those 6 combos represent 71%. So, oh my god, my maths is gone. Sorry. 2/7 of the time, he has to have a bluff 2/7 of the time, whereas he has to have less than 2/7 of the time, and he has to have a value hand more than 5/7 of the time for this to be a bad call. So for all the combos of King Queen he has, for those 6 combos, he has to be bluffing no more than 2/5 of that. Is that right? Yes, I think that's right. So he has to be bluffing no more than 2.4 out of those 10 combos for this to be a bad call. And because this guy's an aggressive guy, because I think he's good, I think he's probably going to be bluffing more than that, because I think a lot of people are going to overfold this river in this situation. It's a spot where I personally, on a river in his position, I personally would be jamming all the combos of King Jack and Queen Jack all day, every day. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him as a good regular, as a regular respect. I wouldn't be surprised to see him do the same. So we do call, we kind of make a hero call. I'm just talking about the specific hand we choose to call with very briefly. I don't think it has any particularly good thing about it, because clearly it's just a bluff catcher at this stage, because we think his range is very polarized. Doesn't really have any good blockers, because 9x pretty much always checks the flop. It doesn't have any bad blockers either, so I'm pretty happy with using this as a bluff catcher, because we clearly don't want to use a jack, anything with a jack in it. And King Queen and King X, anything with a King and Queen in it, is a pretty neutral bluff catcher. So we don't really have any good bluff catchers here, because his bluffs contain kings and queens as well as his value hands. Unfortunately, this time he shows up with King Queen with the King of Spades, which I think he's played fine. I think the turn is possibly close about whether he wants to have a betting range at all. If in sort of a game theoretical perspective, simply because I'm not sure if he ever shows up with a flush on his turn. But with that said, I think explosively speaking, he's going to get enough folds at 100L. People just aren't thinking about his range in enough depth, especially while playing, that they're going to get folds. He's going to get plenty of folds with his nut flush draw to justify the bets. I mean, especially considering he hits the nuts on a jack as well. Okay, he doesn't hit the nuts, but the fact that he has a King of Spades blocker makes his hand extremely strong. Okay, I'm just going to take a quick sip of my drink because talking for more than half an hour is actually quite thirsty work. I do not envy my lecturers. Okay, so we're going to have time for one or two more hands in this video. I have more than that, so we're not going to worry about that at all. King Jack suited, very standard call pre, against a regular raising 20% in middle position. Yeah, not much else to say there. Flop, 2 overs, gut shot, backdoor flush draw, not folding to a c-bet. He's c-betting a pretty low percentage of 42 over a decent sample. But I'm not sure that necessarily says anything about the way his range is constructive. More his checking range is likely to be better protected than lots of other regulars. Turn double gutter, and I still don't think we want to be folding, especially with 2 overs, because we have outs against queens, jacks, ace 10, and we have tons of outs against all of those hands. But I don't think we really want to be raising because we don't rep a particularly wide range when we do raise. So we have, in terms of strong hands pre that we get to the turn like this, pocket 10s, pocket 9s, probably pocket 7s, we could probably peel once on a flop, and 10-9 suited. But pocket 10s is 3 combos, pocket 9s is 1 combo, pocket 7s is 3 combos, and 10-9 suited is 1 combo, because obviously the diamonds, clubs and hearts are outs. So that's a very narrow value range, and also you'll note that there's a very high weighting of 10x hands in there, and if he has a 10, then it's very easy to block a very significant portion of our value range. We do call, River's a blank unfortunately, and he checks. I think we just need a bet here. Fold out, miss nut flush draws, ace jack if he bets it twice. I'm not sure I necessarily expect him to fold any made hand, considering queen jack suited missed as well. King queen of diamonds are probably going to peel twice. Ace jack we might just about peel twice here. But with that said, I don't think we want to be betting super small here, and just in case he does choose to play, I don't know, pocket 8s like this and then fold the river. Also, I guess some people might just about find a hero call with a hand as weak as ace 4 of diamonds or something in this spot. So we bet a pretty standard size, about 2/3 of the pot. And we get called pretty quickly, and he shows up with 10-8. I don't think the hand is particularly interesting from our perspective, because I don't see any other way we can play it. Except I think it's quite useful to point out why we don't really want to even consider raising the turn. I think the hand is interesting from his perspective. Firstly, just to point out that this hand, the hand he chooses to call with in the end, is actually a very good hand to call with. Given he's raising 20% in middle position, we're going to 3-bet queens plus pre, so we don't have those hands in our range. We can't value bet those hands. When we reach a river with ace 10 and worse, we're not going to value bet that. So our value betting range on this river, well, we might just about value bet ace 10, but let's forget about that for a second. And also that actually kind of strengthens my point. Our value betting range on this river is pocket jacks specifically. Pocket 10s, pocket 9s, 10-9 suited, possibly very occasionally 9-8 suited, though I don't personally flat that pre, and pocket 7s. Now you'll notice that a lot of those hands have a 10 in them, so he blocks our value betting range very significantly, whereas we pretty much never have an 8 that we choose to bluff with here. We might show up at the river with pocket 8s, but we probably just choose to check that because we don't expect better hands to fold. So I don't think his 8 blocker is at all negative. And I think flatting ace 8 suited pre would be pretty shocking in our situation. Yeah, so I think it's worth noting again the value of blockers in a calling range. With that said, I'm not altogether too keen on how he played the hand. I think, personally, I check the turn. I think checking the flop is also particularly valid, but I definitely don't like betting the flop hand. Just because it's actually quite tough to get calls from many worse hands which don't have very significant equity against you. I mean, if we quickly look at this, I'm just going to quickly open Equilab. This is very close to the bottom of our turn calling range in terms of equity against 10-8s, and I'm guessing this has a very decent amount of equity against it. Although given a jack isn't good, it's going to be a little bit less than it otherwise would be. So this is I'll move it over here so you can see it. So this is 10-8 of clubs against king jack of hearts on 10 of diamonds, 9 of clubs, 9 of hearts, and then I think it was a 7 of diamonds. I'm guessing we're going to see about 30% equity for king jack, possibly a little bit less, but that's still very, very significant equity for the bottom of the betting range against 10-8s. For the bottom of the calling range, rather. Oh, okay, that's quite substantially less, but still, you see my points. Especially considering if 10-8 can't really call an ace on an ace river. So that's another few fake outs, so to speak, that it loses to king jack on the river against, or it loses to king jack on an ace river, which adds another 4 outs, and it also struggles on a diamond. So yeah, but the river I think is definitely very good, very well played. We're just going to go through one last hand. Oh, I like this one. Oh, I do like this one. This is I'm not quite sure what the strategic value of this hand is, but it's really fun, so I guess you may as well stick around to see it. This guy is a bad spicy rag. He swings his dick around a lot on 2+2, but and nobody tells him there because of course nobody wants to, but nobody wants to tell him he's not very good, but yeah, because I don't think he's watching this, I think it's fine. We 3-bet ace king suited, pretty standard. get 4 bets. This deep, we're just about deep enough that we want to 5 bets more rather than 5 bet jamming, so because we're small blind against button, we're definitely not considering anything but 5 betting. And we get called, so we're going to play a 5 bet pot here with a flop SPR of about 1.2. So his 4 bet range isn't particularly crazy, but it's quite believable that he's just not folding any of it against a 5 bet of that with that size. Something I quite like doing is just when you have a very small flop SPR, I quite like just checking my whole range. Just because it lets people spaz against your strong hands, and you often get free cards with your weak hands, which is good. It's especially considering in spots where you do have a small flop SPR. That's namely 4 bet and 5 bet pots. Your strong hands tend to be close to invulnerable. So we do check. And he bets pretty small. We do have some check folds here. This isn't going to be one of them, because we just have some like ace-5 suited type hands that we're just going to want to check fold here. Maybe c-bet ace-5 suited in particular. But if we have something like ace-3 suited, then we're just going to want to fold that. So we do call. Turns a queen. Now, I don't think that he's going to bet jacks on this flop. Call it intuition. I think he might flat aces and kings against a 5 bet pre, but we block those. And he doesn't have many queen x pre. Okay, so frankly I don't know what on earth he's doing, betting 4.8% of the pot or something. It's just decides against which we're just not folding anything. And I think one of the things he's trying to do is make his jam with aces and kings, or jam with a queen. So he reaches the river against a really weak range. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to call with my whole range here. River's a queen, and that basically removes any little chance he has a queen left. Because we don't think he's probably going to go for 2. He's probably not going to go for the flop and turn bet with pocket jacks. Our hand actually becomes really good to call with because we do block aces and kings. And also the fact that he's spazzy means that when he does jam, I just expect him to be over bluffing the spot. I think we also have a small read from his turn sizing, trying to guess against a weaker range rather than just jamming, which I think he would if he's trying to go for value. So we decide to hero call, and we run into ace 10, and we ship a nice pot. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed that. I'm actually going to bed now. It's just gone midnight here and my sleep schedule is, thank God, it's actually quite normal at the moment. So I've been TheDefiniteArticle for Grinder School. I hope you enjoy this when you see it, which will probably be a week from now. I've actually left recording this series to the last minute, sorry Jeffrey. But certainly leave any comments in the forum thread. And good luck at the tables. Cheers.